Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Elder Abuse Conference program. We've got a great lineup of people today who've had vast experience in the field here in the county. Very privileged and thankful that Judge Vlack will be joining us, the Sheriff Knudsen, representatives of the banking and securities community, representatives of the county adult protective services, the faith community, and finally our district attorney, who's been very instrumental in this from the beginning. We had this idea about a year and a half ago. We were all ready to go a year ago in September, and COVID hit. And the church was so nice in every way, trying to schedule us, but with COVID, as you recall, we just didn't have large programs occurring. So we worked with Pastor Larry Ziman, and he was very thoughtful in getting us the room and coordinating with us over the last couple of months as we reinstituted the program. And Doug Weiler, the gentleman you've seen run around quickly, has done just about everything else for this program. So thank you again, Doug and Faith Community Church. It is really a privilege to introduce our first speaker, Judge Edward Vlack. He's been on the bench for 20 years. He's done everything in the circuit court in St. Croix County. I mean, treatment court, domestic violence, just everything. He's seen every kind of case, civil, criminal, and unfortunately, elder abuse cases. So with that very modest introduction, and believe me, with all of our speakers, I could go on for many minutes about their accomplishments and what they've done, but with that, it is an honor to turn to his honor, Judge Edward Vlack.
Thank you, Supervisor. First of all, I have to just forewarn everybody, I love presenting, but I'm used to wearing a headset and walking around, so I may sometimes get away from the microphone. I probably shouldn't do that, so I'll try not to do that. But again, welcome everybody. I want to thank the supervisor for setting this up. I have a question. How many of you have heard of the wooden bowl story? Anybody? Okay. Pardon me? The wooden bowl story. Wooden bowl. Okay. Now, I can't. Okay, I got the right slide up there. So, there are a number of versions of this story depending on the culture and etc. But basically it's this. There's a family that lives together. There's a husband and wife. They have a son about 4 years old. And they also have one of the fathers. Doesn't make a difference if it's the husband's father or the wife's father. And they always have their evening meal together. And when they started doing this, they would have the good plates. And so as the grandfather got older, got a little feeble. And sometimes he'd kind of drop things on the floor and started dropping plates, and the plates broke. So the husband and wife got all upset and said, okay, we're going to give him a wooden bowl. Well, then again, as he got older, he started to drool and started dropping food on the floor, and they got tired of this. And they finally said, well, we're going to have the grandfather just eat in the corner by himself because we can't stand to watch this. So a few years later, the husband and wife are coming into the house, and their son by this time is about 9 years old, and he's got some wood chips. And the parents look at him and say, well, what are you doing with these wood chips? And he said, well, I'm making bowls for you and Mom, so when you get as old as Grandpa, you've got a bowl to eat out of. And of course, with that, the mom and dad realized that the way they've been treating the grandfather is not how they should be treated. So maybe in our culture, the grandkids will tell us how to treat our grandparents. But having said that, first of all, I want to mention, I did bring a handout, and it's much more than I've got in this PowerPoint. It's got some general information about elder abuse, but I'm just going to try to just stick to Wisconsin law today. I'm no expert on this. First of all, I want to mention I've seen Ms. Edlin in my courtroom a number of times. I want to thank her and Ms. Postpiller very much for, and publicly, what they do. Having said that, in Wisconsin, an elder is somebody over 60. I'm not going to ask people to, tell us, okay. But there are 4 categories of elder abuse in Wisconsin. They are abuse, financial exploitation, neglect, and self-neglect. Abuse consists of the following things: physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, treatment without consent, and unreasonable confinement or restraint. Financial exploitation can be something like such as robbery, theft, unauthorized use of identity information, unauthorized use of credit cards, obtaining money or property by fraud, neglect of a fiscal agent to fulfill the responsibilities. This could be a guardian, a conservator. Neglect, which is the third category, is the failure of a caregiver to try to secure or maintain adequate care, services, or supervision for an individual. And then the last one is self-neglect. And that is a significant danger to an individual's physical or mental health. I'll have to rely on the sheriff to let me know this thing is advancing. So it's a significant danger to an individual's physical or mental health due to that individual being responsible for their own care and they fail to get it. So, as a judge, how do judges get involved as a circuit court in these types of cases? Keep in mind, courts are the last entity that gets involved in cases of elder abuse. I mean, you're going to hear from both, I'm sure, Ms. Edlund and Ms. Postpiller, the sheriff, district attorney. Usually these cases come to light because somebody makes a complaint. So-and-so is being physically abused, emotionally abused, somebody's stealing money. So there has to be an investigation. Judges don't do that. The investigation can be done by the Department of Human Services. It could be done by law enforcement. As a result of the investigation, there might be something filed at the courthouse. Could be charges through Mr. Anderson's office that are filed by the sheriff to their office. They file it. Could be a request for a guardian. Could be a request for a temporary restraining order. So we get involved in cases such as criminal cases, protective orders, guardianships or protective placements, and probate proceedings. The probate proceeding is one you usually don't see in the general discussions about elder abuse, and I'll explain that in a minute. Criminal charges, as Mr. Anderson, I'm sure we're going to talk about in more detail, could be a battery or substantial battery. The difference is the extent of the injury. Sexual assault, false imprisonment, theft or transaction card crimes, abuse of individuals at risk, abuse and neglect of patients and residents in facilities. Protective orders could include domestic abuse TROs, that's a temporary restraining order or an injunction, and harassment restraining order or injunction, and then finally, an individual at risk restraining order injunction. The guardianships and protective placements can include a guardianship of the person, guardianship of their estate, protective services, protective placements. I want to mention that, and as Supervisor Feidler mentioned, I'm sad to say nothing surprises me anymore. I've seen everything you possibly see, often too many times. Some of the most difficult cases are you get an individual who lives in their own home, and the siblings have to decide whether or not mom or dad needs to get some more help. And that person is bound and determined, no way are they going to leave their house. And a lot of these cases are very difficult, but some of those are the gut-wrenching cases you can see because that person sincerely believes they are able to remain at home by themselves and take care of themselves. And they're tough. Probate proceedings. This is one you don't see very often discussed in elder abuse, and that is this. Person dies, they have a will. And somebody says, well, hold it. When they did this will, they really weren't competent. Or you've got relatives fighting. Well, how come so-and-so got all this stuff? I bet that person was putting undue influence on the person who just died and said, give me this stuff in the will. Those are cases. And again, those are really gut-wrenching cases. So this is the highlights. And as I mentioned, I leave the courthouse more in the last 2 years saying you cannot make this stuff up. And people just wouldn't believe what we see almost every day. So if you have questions, I'm open to any questions. It seems to me that because the courts are the last entity involved, it may make more sense once the other presentations are given. You may think of more questions about what the court system does or doesn't do or can and cannot do after hearing those. But if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer the questions the best I can. And again, some of the difficult things about these cases that, and again, I'm not speaking, a lot of people who get involved in these know this. The person who might have been abused the person who might have been robbed or had their property stolen doesn't know it's happening. And so when the cases get to Mr. Anderson's office, they have to prove these cases. And sad to say, the person who was the victim may not even realize they've been a victim. They may have difficulty remembering if they remember anything, and I'm not saying that to be critical. That's just what we're dealing with. They may not remember. So often Mr. Anderson's office has to prove these cases without having that person being able to testify or even have information about what might have been taken. So they are very, very difficult cases to handle. And again, I'm sure we'll hear from the sheriff, Mr. Anderson, Ms. Edlin, Ms. Post-Pillar, that these are tough. Yes, sir.
You feel that because we're basically human and we have basic instincts and behavior, that the system is so non-basic and advanced that the stuff gets shuffled under the rug or out the door?
So the question is that, and I'm going to summarize this. So because our culture is so advanced, do some of these get shoved under the rug, so to speak? My experience has been, and again, my role as a judge is I'm not an investigator. My experience has been, and again, this is why I want to just give a public recognition to those people who are in the trenches, be it the sheriff's deputies, the investigators in Mr. Anderson's office, as well as human services, that to my knowledge, these are not being just shoved under the rug. The difficulty, and then again, I don't want to speak for them, the difficulty is that sometimes these happen, and until it's brought to their attention, nobody knows. And again, unfortunately, often the victims are people who don't realize what's taking place. There might be money taken from a bank account. They don't know that. They may be relying on somebody who technically is not appointed by a court as a guardian, but just, this is a friend, take care, pay my bills for me. Money's being taken. And again, I'm sure that the sheriff and Mr. Anderson can speak of that as well, Ms. Enelman, Ms. Post-Pillar. But from my experience, I'm not aware of any of these being just shoved under the rug. I think it's actually good you have this type of a conference to bring it out to the forefront because it does exist, sadly. And as I mentioned, maybe hopefully the grandkids will tell our culture it's time to recognize the value that grandparents and the elders have in our society. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but okay. Okay, that's fine. Anything else?
Judge, I have a question, but I also want to mention that the judge has indicated he would like to stick around for much of the conference today, or all of it, and could be available for chatting with you during the break and afterwards if it gets to that point. So we can follow through on some of those questions. I would also add that it's interesting, the United Nations this year, as one of its themes in its elder area, its theme is access to justice. So it's one of the reasons we have the judge, the sheriff, the district attorney, because so many of the issues that we do face have to be resolved through access to justice. So I was going to ask the judge. Judge, we've got an audience that is physically present, but one that will be with us through television presentations from our recording later. Could you just take us through a real simple example of what happens at the courthouse? When do you get, you mentioned it earlier, but when do you get involved? And do most of these cases get settled out before they come to you, or do they come to you? And what's the normal setting? I mean, we see things on TV of pretty much criminal trials, but when it comes to you, are you a counselor as well as a judicial official?
The reason I'm smiling is that I'm not sure if I would call myself a counselor, though there are cases. I'm going to say specifically, and I don't want to mention any names, but recently there was a case involving somebody who allegedly was not able to care for themselves. And you have to, from my perspective in those situations, get on that person's level and try to explain to that person, this is what's happening and why. And in that regard, a counselor, and yet ultimately I have to make a decision, does that person actually need a guardian? One of the things I want to mention, because everybody here has some some experience with elder abuse, and because there's a bigger audience, The materials also included some signs of elder abuse, and I think it might be good that even though this is in the handout and not in the PowerPoint, these are certain signs that should be looked for, because if you're wondering, is there possible abuse in this case? Here are some signs. Physical signs of physical abuse: bruises, pressure marks or sores, broken bones, abrasions and burns. Sexual abuse: bruises or injury to the genital area. And that might present themselves as difficulty in moving or sitting. Emotional abuse: withdrawal from normal activities, anxiety, depression, unusual behavior, unease. Neglect: again, bed sores, unattended medical needs, poor hygiene, unusual weight loss. Financial exploitation: uncharacteristic purchases by an individual or caregiver, failure to pay bills or keep appointments, questionable behavior. I suspect a number of people in the audience have specific examples and contact and also experience with people saying, I got this phone call. Somebody said, if I just deposit this money, I could be really rich. Or if I do this, I'm going to get this free gift card. Or if I go buy this gift card and send it. Other signs: they stop taking part in activities that they enjoy. They look messy, unwashed hair, dirty clothes, trouble sleeping. Again, losses of weight. They become withdrawn, or agitated or violent. Signs of trauma: rocking back and forth. And again, unexplained bruises, burns, scars, cuts, broken eyeglasses, frames, physical signs of punishment, being restrained. Again, bed sores, preventable conditions. Lacks medical aids, glasses, walker, dentures, hearing aid, or medications. Got an eviction notice for unpaid rent, notice of late mortgage, home eviction, bills stacking up on the kitchen table. Hazards in their living situation. And then they're showing signs of insufficient care. Again, I would ask that anybody who may even suspect this, because I think Ms. Edlin, Ms. Postpiller mentioned, as well I think the sheriff, that if you have a concern and you raise this question, a lot of this is done confidentially. And I suspect most of the people in this room have heard of the case where somebody said, I wish I would have said something. So that would be the last thing I want to say, is that if you have any suspicions, I would rather you raise it and it turns out it's not true than you don't raise it and it is. So again, with that, if there's questions, fine, but I think it'd be better if we have the, yes, sir. No, that's okay, don't apologize.
What I've learned is document, like you do in court, you have exhibit A, B, and C, document. So now you're not just saying because your mind's wandering. You're saying, okay, here's exhibit A, here's exhibit B. Then, something's wrong. That's just my way.
And again, I would say, because the point was made, is that you should document things. And if you are an outside observer, yes. If it's yourself, if you still have the ability to document and realize you should document, that's fantastic. My primary concern is the people who are at the stage where they don't remember that they should document. But good point. I think outside observers, if you see things and if you have questions and are concerned about reporting it, well, then start document. And remember, if you take notes, keep in mind your worst enemy might read those notes someday. So, anything else?
Judge, I actually had one more
Yeah.
question. You went through the list of things under Wisconsin law that are abuses and perhaps criminal offenses. But do you see most of your cases involving elder abuse, are they criminal or are they civil? And what's the time frame that they go through the courts in generally? I know there are a vast variety of time frames, but what would be an example of what one could expect if they brought a case?
A lot of it depends. Let me say, I'll start first of all with the guardianship. We might get a request that somebody is no longer competent and handle the decisions for their own care or else their finances. We can do a temporary guardianship in a matter of minutes. And then usually the hearing is held within 20 days. And I've had some situations I may continue the hearing to get more information. And yet, generally, I'm going to say within 30 days, that guardianship is decided. Now, again, Ms. Edlin, Ms. Postpiller have more experience than I do because I'm only one courtroom. But I think you're generally talking a guardianship, that's going to be done within 45 days. Criminal case is a little different. It depends on the extent of the injury because, as I mentioned, a battery is generally somebody's been harmed without their consent. A substantial battery is they've been harmed, and it might be a broken bone, might be a cut, might be something else. It's a little more substantial with or without consent. But again, law enforcement has to investigate that, get the report to the district attorney, the charges are filed, and as Mr. Anderson's going to mention, once that's filed, then you have a number of constitutional rights for the defendant, and now obviously we have the constitutional rights for the victim. So depending on the seriousness of that case might take a little longer. I'm going to guess that could be 90 days, even longer. We talk about restraining orders for either domestic abuse, individuals at risk, or harassment. Restraining order can be granted in minutes. You generally have a hearing within 2 weeks, whether or not an injunction should be granted. And generally for the judges, when we have the hearing on the injunction, the decision is made right there. So you're talking probably 2 weeks. The probate proceedings I talked about, which were the will contests, that could take a year. I mean, understand is that the person who's claimed to have been abused because there was undue influence is deceased. So you have a lot of questions about evidence to prove that. I'm not sure if that answered your question as good as you wanted it, but that's the best I can tell you.
I will say for those who may have missed it, Judge Vlack has a very comprehensive paper that he brought with him today, and it's out in the lobby. And be sure to pick that up for further reference. I'll also chat and try to be sure that's on our county website so it can be referred to for those of you who want to share that information with others. I also just going to make a comment. I've sat through in each of those 4 courtrooms that the judge mentioned, his courtroom, the other judges, and we have a remarkable set of judicial officials in St. Croix County. When I kind of asked the judge, maybe an unfair question if he was also a counselor, and he was very diplomatic in his answer, I can say, I think in the nicest way, that our judges are counselors as well. And I've been in courtrooms where the judge is just a nasty person, frankly, and dictates what's happening all the time. But our judges are so empathetic to the problems of the people that come in front of them, while being extraordinarily professional in the way they conduct themselves, and their approach to everything is just so amazing in St. Croix County. We have 4 gems in our 4 courtrooms. I say that for sure. Are there any other questions for the judge? You don't get too many opportunities to ask the judge the question, so feel free if anybody's got another question.
Yes, sir. No, I still do my own, thank you. I have to say one thing, is that, yes, I think all the judges try to be as compassionate as we can and understanding. But I have to admit, and I know Mr. Anderson can vouch for this as the sheriff, and I think Ms. Edlin, Ms. Postbiller, I can be nasty at times. And it's very simple. Everybody in my courtroom gets treated as a human being with respect. If they cross the line, then my attitude may change. So it doesn't happen often, but I have to be transparent. It does happen. So, okay.
Well, again, Judge, thank you so much for being with us this morning and continuing to be with us this morning. We appreciate that so much. And well, our next speaker will be Sheriff Knudsen. Thank you, Judge. You got water. I'll change this out. I mentioned to the judge and to the sheriff and to our other speakers that their introductions will be the shortest probably on record for them. We're not going to start with how he graduated from 6th grade and got the golden apple from the teacher and advanced to middle school despite a 4-3 vote of the teachers and that sort of thing, and take him all the way through his career. But we will take the sheriff through a 25-year career in St. Croix County where you can just imagine he's done everything. And he's been our sheriff for the past 5 years?
4.
4 years plus, closer to 5, let's say. Give me a break.
Feels like it.
Yeah, it feels like 25 again. But Sheriff Knudsen, again, we're so lucky to have him. And I know that we've got Brad Beckman, head of the ADRC, with us today, and the sheriff made an excellent presentation to the Aging and Disabilities Resource Council in the spring, and got a lot of very favorable comments. So we said we had to have the sheriff on the program. And thank you again, Sheriff, for being with us.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. As Mr. Feidler had mentioned, we did back in February talk about some things that really caught some attention. Really, it was the statistics of what happens to residents in St. Croix County when it comes to frauds or scams and abuse. And that's really, Judge Vlack talked about kind of the components of each one of those. And there is a difference not only in fraud, because some of that gets very difficult to investigate, because many times the frauds that occur are from outside of our area. They're outside of our jurisdiction. So when we talk about the amount of money that is stolen online or through the mail, some of that stuff we can never get back. It's a very complex, and it's hard to tell people when they call up and say, hey, I just was scammed and I sent thousands of dollars to this address, and it's an IP address, and really we really have no recourse. We can find the IP address, but many times it's overseas. And even for us to do an investigation really requires cooperation on the other end. And there are states that are too busy. There are countries that have no interest in assisting us investigating these crimes. So we talk about a lot of the frauds that take place, but then we also talk about elder abuse. And, as we look at the amount of money nationally, $3 billion for the financial exploitation, and the number one is a government scam. People calling up and talking about, I'm the IRS and you owe this much money. Or I'm your local sheriff and you have a warrant for your arrest. Please come down and pay it. And it's the craziest thing. I read these reports in the morning, and the reports are, we've had a couple, this is your police chief or your sheriff, you have a warrant, you need to go buy Target gift cards, scan them in, and send those to this address. It makes no sense. And the number of people that do it, but they do it out of complying, not wanting to get into trouble. And it doesn't always take somebody with advanced age to be a victim of these scams. I had one that wasn't much older than me that I knew that called and said, a local police department, they're going to come and arrest me. I said, well, that police department's not even in this county, so they'd probably get a hold of us. Nope, they said they're going to come down. I need to go. And she had already bought cards. And I was shocked that those folks on the phone can be that coercive and convincing. So we'll touch on that a little bit too as I go through some of these statistics that people are so good at deceit on the phone that it's not just the elderly that are scammed. There are younger people as well, but because the elderly could have a cognitive disability or dementia kicking in or medications, whatever it might be, they seem to be the target of much of the crime. We go through, these are the statutes that we work off of. And as Judge Vlack had mentioned, it's really a pronged approach to a crime. We'll receive a call, we'll go out and we'll investigate the call. We'll gather as much information as possible, whether it be on a fraud or an abuse. And when we go out and we collect evidence, it could be paperwork, it could be documentation of some form, photos. We may end up at the hospital on an elder abuse getting medical records. We compile everything. If in the event there's a public safety concern that we need to intervene on, we may make an arrest at that time. But sometimes they're so in-depth that our investigation takes weeks, if not months, on some of these scams. And we then, once compiled, we send everything up to the district attorney's office and he reviews it. And if he believes there's enough for a criminal charge, that gets that process with his office going. So we're really the gatherers of the information, and if need be, we step in front of a public safety issue. But so oftentimes, we look at cooperation, and sometimes when you have some elderly frauds or scams, you may have one child calling in, and the other child could be the suspect. And it's a dual watching mom or dad, and sometimes our cooperation is difficult to get from certain areas. So I'm not going to spend too much time on these stats these statutes because District Attorney Anderson is going to go through some of that in his presentation. We look at common elder fraud schemes, and each one of these we have dealt with. Over the years, I've seen every one of these come across my desk as we read reports in the morning. And that doesn't count the city of Hudson. That doesn't count the city of Richmond, city of River Falls, and all the municipalities as we go through the county. So I can only say the ones that I've seen in my years, and I know in the areas where there's more population, such as those city departments deal with these, and most of those have the nursing homes in there. Some of the elder care living centers. So they have much more than we do. But as we look at like the romance scheme, people get online and sometimes those other victims on our end of the line, they're lonely. So they just want someone to talk to. And they get that trust built up, and pretty soon they're sending thousands of dollars. We had one that was sending thousands of dollars overseas so their new friend could come over to America. Well, none of that was true. And then once that other end got all the money they needed, they cut it off. No more communication. And that's when the person called. He's not returning my messages. I think I got scammed. But for months of sending money, no call was made of, boy, is this right? They didn't tell anybody, so no family got involved or friends. And so many oftentimes, once the money's gone, we can't get it back. Tech support scams, people calling up or getting on your internet, they'll send links, and as soon as you click on the link, they really have access to your devices. They get on and they steal your bank accounts. They steal your contact list, your other emails in there that you've sent emails to other folks, and they'll go then and attack those folks online for tech support. The knowledge and the time, but if that's your job, sitting at a computer trying to fraud people all day for 8 hours a day in another country, you probably get very good at it. Grandparent scam. A couple months ago, we had another one of these where a grandparent will get a call and it'll be somebody that for a brief second sounds like a grandchild, grandson, granddaughter, and they say, Grandma, I'm down, I went on spring break and I'm in jail. This was the one we had most recent. Spring break and I'm in jail. I'm going to need some money. But don't tell mom or dad because they're going to be really mad at me. But can you go to the Walmart and get gift cards? And they did it. And then once the money is sent, then once the other line knows they've got you hooked, they have another person call and say, well, this is the police in, name the country. Another thing has been brought up. They still owe an attorney fee to get this done because they've already got some money. They've got a hook. They want a little more. Luckily, there are some of these, Target, Walmart, that when they see people coming through now and getting a bunch of gift cards that may not be somebody that usually comes through at 8 in the morning on a Tuesday to buy a bunch of gift cards, they hold on. Are you being scammed? And they're starting to get involved as well. I have my own personal story. When I went to Target and I have the Stop Drugs poster contest. So each year, 41 winners throughout the county, and I have to buy gift cards for 41 winners. So I get $50 gift cards. So some Saturday morning, I'm dressed in plain clothes, looking like I just came out of the field, how I often dress. And here I come with 41 gift cards. And I had 5 people from Target around me. One was a manager, and they wouldn't run it through. I had to show my ID. I had to explain it to them. I may have even had a calendar in the truck that I said, "It's my picture. This is what I'm doing." And then they let me do it. So they are putting things in place to try to help. But it's still amazing how many times the thieves are successful in bilking citizens. Government impersonation scams, we talked about that. The IRS, you owe this amount. IRS will never call you on the phone and say you owe this amount. The sheriff will never call you on the phone and say you have a warrant. Come in and take care of this. Well, he may say come in and take care of it, but then you at least get to see a cop. And you can verify, you can get paperwork. But anything they say, send it to a bank account, make a check, debit card, give us your credit card number. That will never, ever happen. We won't do it. Police departments won't do it. It's unfortunately a successful scam because people want to comply. They want to be good. They don't want to cause problems. All right, I'll send it. But again, once that money's gone, there isn't much we can get back. Sweepstakes, charity lottery scams. I'm looking for a place to send my money. I am just, I'm in receipt of all this and you're part of someone that I'm reaching out to. All I need is $500 to secure a loan and that pays the taxes. And can you please help out? We don't get as many of these scams anymore, successful scams, but we do still get them. I still get some of these emails as well. Home repair scams, we could talk about those people that show up in kind of the rural areas that are doing asphalt replacement. And they get a bunch of money first and they never finish the job. And even the job that they did do, it's subpar, it's old material that they're using. And again, once that check is written, it's more than likely difficult, more than likely going to be a challenge to get it back. I'm not saying those have never gotten back, because at times we have caught some. There are some things to watch for, and it's really making sure that there's a contract that is signed. Looking at vehicles, making sure that what they have on the side of their vehicle matches up with the card they're giving you, and that it's a good number. Go call that number first prior to entering into an agreement to see if it's a company. Google it. If it doesn't exist, then they are probably not a legitimate company. And there was one gentleman that we had caught in the area that had done a number of these, and we did end up sending him to prison. He ended up getting convicted of that. TV, radio scams, family caregiver scams. We're going to go into that, and that's going to be my next slide. This elder financial abuse. So this is one of the most difficult scams for us, because there is a component of family. There's a component of when the victim, even if lucid, they're on their own, somebody's taking care of them, a caregiver, and this goes not only to somebody stealing money from them that they know, but also what we had just talked about, the online scams. Part of the reason we don't find out about a lot of these things is they're afraid to call and tell us. They feel that if they call and tell us and their family finds out that they were the victim of a fraud, that they were so easily bilked out of money, that the family will say, you know what, you need more monitoring. You're no longer able to live on your own. You're easily scammed, and we can't have that again. So for fear of loss of freedom, of getting placed in an area or in a residence that's not their own home, they don't call. They don't even tell family. They don't tell family that I was stolen from. So a lot of the crimes that we just talked about, many don't get reported to us out of embarrassment. But then we talk about the families. So our family member, friend, power of attorney, caregiver, people that have gained the trust of the victim. And some of the things that we have seen, not only the elder abuse, but they're withholding care. They're withholding, their medications. And in turn, they're getting money from that. I was part of a scam from a caregiver, and my part was actually on the front end. And it was probably 20 years ago. I went to a motorcycle crash, north of North Hudson. Gentleman there, the driver, serious head injury, hit the guardrail, and off he went to Regions. Years had passed. I never knew what happened to him. But then 15, 20 years later, we get a scam from a caregiver. Somebody had called in and said, they're in charge of this person's finances, and we don't believe that they're properly handling the estate. Now, this gentleman was, I think his parents had been deceased. Maybe a sibling had called in, but they were not real in contact quite often. And he was because of the brain injury, of lower ability to recognize that he was being scammed. And it probably took us from when we first started it. We had to get a forensic accountant to come in. And it took 6-8 months to go through all the records. Also ended up in a conviction and a prison sentence. And it was hundreds of thousands of dollars that had been taken from this person's estate. But again, that took somebody seeing it going, boy, something's not right there. And that's the other issue too. When people move in to places as caregivers, and there are some diminished capacities of the person they're taking care of, and all of a sudden you see that caregiver change their lifestyle habits, such as vehicles, clothes, eating out more. Somebody may ask a few questions. Is that normal? They lived like this. I've known that person for years. Now they're in as a caregiver and they have all these things. Could be another reason, but it may also be a reason that we need to look into and say, gosh, is there something more? Is everything on the up and up here? Is that victim being cared for the way they should be, both physically and financially? And here is, make sure I have that up. So here's where we talked about in February, March, that caught the attention. And it caught my attention as well. So we ran some statistics out of our system, and these are different numbers than we talked about in February, March, because I expanded it. We did just a 1-year window when we talked about it. This is 1 year and 9 months, 8 full months. So we had a total of 158 victims. And we looked under fraud cases from citizens. And again, this is just handled by the St. Croix County Sheriff's Office. This is not the city of Hudson. This is not the city of River Falls, New Richmond, Baldwin, Woodville, Hammond, Roberts, Glenwood, Somerset. This is just county residents that we have handled. 158 victims. And in this one, we looked at 45 years or older. So we look at the decades in which they were born. But then at the bottom, how much money has been lost from these residents. $792,000 in fraud. Of that, I'm going to go back. Back on there. 2 of those were family exploitation cases. Those 2 family exploitation cases were $433,000. That's the 2 cases in the last year and 9 months, year and 8 months of families taking advantage of a loved one, and that was one was $343,000 and one was $80,000. That doesn't count the one that I had mentioned about getting the forensic accountant in. That was outside of that. So, the total without the family exploitation was $358,000. That included check frauds, debit card frauds, door-to-door sales, identity thefts. There's 27 identity thefts that we've taken in the year and a half. 33 of the debit credit card, taking names out, running up card debt, sending gift cards. We had 14 of those in the last time frame. Social Security, unemployment, 29, where we go back to that government issue. And then wire fraud, we had 10. 5 were completed, 10 attempts, or five attempts, 5 completed, so a total of 10 total. And that was the grandparent scheme. That was the send money by debit card numbers. Those are some astounding numbers. We'll go back to ages 21 through 45, also in that time frame. So the younger version, but still, where I go back to how good these people are on the phone, there was 63 victims in that age range in that time frame. And that was for a total of $35,000. A lot of those were the cards. A lot of debit cards. Sending gift cards, a number of those. So, one of the messages I want to those that are watching this that may be elderly at home by themselves, because you got bilked doesn't mean you're vulnerable. It means they're good at what they do on the other end of the line. So you still have to give us a call. We can at least attempt to go after some of these players. We have just recently, there was some pictures that were sent, some young kids, but one young adult, or not an adult, young kid, 15 years old, was sending inappropriate pictures because he was being pressured from a victim from another country. We've just been in contact working through. The other country has identified 4 individuals that were part of this scheme. Send us pictures or send us money. Send us pictures or send us money. And we're working with the FBI on that. So rarely does it happen, but it does happen that we get cooperation from another country. And the FBI will take note of, especially when juveniles are sending pics, that gets their attention. And then you roll in the scam of send us money, or we will share these photos with everyone in your contact list, everyone on your Facebook list. So there are ways that we can get overseas, but it is rare. And again, so the sooner we can get on it, compile things, the better we are. Again, I mentioned some of these things. Why are some crimes not reported? First, they don't know how to report it. Who do they report it to? The simple answer is contacting the Emergency Communications Center or the local police department. Normally, it's not an emergency taking place at that moment, but it could be. It could require a 911 call, but more than likely, it's going to be the non-emergency number. And the global one for St. Croix County, when I say global, it's St. Croix County, is the 715-386-4701. That's the non-emergency number right to the dispatch center. And they will then dispatch it out to whatever jurisdiction, whether it be a city, municipal, or county officer. And we will come and either call and investigate, or come and collect the information that we may need to start looking into it. Again, I mentioned they may be too ashamed to report it. They're afraid their relatives will lose confidence. Because for many, one of the things that they are really holding on to is that freedom to stay at home by themselves, and they will do whatever they can not to lose that. You know, as we talk about the crime perpetrated by a family member, a trusted friend, again, maybe not even their freedom and put in a home, but they don't want to lose that friend. That may be the only friend that still brings them meals, that still brings them, you know, that talk, the friendship that they require. And oftentimes we see that, I'm going to kind of jump a little bit here, but oftentimes we see that in domestic situations where the night of the domestic and we get the information, clearly there's a victim there. We remove the offender from the residence, and then all of a sudden the victim said, but that's the bill payer. That's the person that pays all the bills. Now I can't get the bills taken care of. You know what? That event never happened. I'm recanting. I'm not going to cooperate. And it makes it very difficult for us to continue to move through the process. I'll equate that to some of the elderly scams where family is involved. They're too important to me to lose, so I'm just going to take the loss. And I can appreciate that, but we would really like to get an investigation going and get other resources. And maybe there is a way for us to separate that family member through the courts, through the district attorney's office, to assist us. And then protecting yourself, recognizing the scams. Again, the government will not call online. They will not call on the phone. If they do, get their information, hang up, look in the phone book, look online, and give us a call. Call that 386-4701. I just got a call from Deputy so-and-so. Is he looking for me? Well, he's not even working right now. Okay. And they do. These scammers do their research. They will look at a roster of a sheriff's office or of a police department. They'll grab a name off of there. So the name may be real, but it's not that person calling. Because again, we will never call and ask for money. Make people pay their bills, outstanding debts. Again, the third bullet point, resist the pressure to act quickly. Take your time, do your research. We are not coming to knock on the door or knock down the door. Even if you have a warrant, there's a process that goes into that. Nobody's showing up at your house. Be cautious of the unsolicited phone calls. And never give any of that information out. No personal information. Even if you think it's a law enforcement officer, we will never ask for your social security number. We will never ask for your place of birth. None of that. We may ask your first, middle, and last name for our reporting, but we'll never ask for social security numbers. Computers, make sure all your antivirus security software is up. Disconnect from the internet if you start seeing pop-up messages and lock screens. Don't fall into that. Be careful what you download. In your personal identification, your bank stuff, passwords. I can't remember all the passwords I have to get in every account. So keep a list, but don't make that list and keep it in online. So if you get hacked, they have all of your passwords. Try to keep those separate. And then some things when you do report it. What we need is, for scams, dollar amounts. And some of these things really go into the ability for Mr. Anderson's office, DA Anderson's office, to prosecute or to move forward with that case. Name the scammer or the company. Again, those guys that show up at your door, If you can safely get a photo of them or their vehicle or their license plate, goes a long ways for our investigation. Tremendously helps us. Dates of contact, methods of communication. If you're getting emails, save those. We could use those. Mailing addresses, websites, method of payment, prepaid cards. Those are difficult. And again, once they get, and sometimes all you do is take a picture of the card. After you've loaded it, they get the numbers off the card. You don't have to do anything with the card other than show them a picture of it. And they've got it. And to keep original documentations, faxes, logs, faxes. Tells you how old this is. Faxes don't exist much anymore. But if you do get faxes, keep those as well. So a lot of it is really just being aware of surroundings and communicating. And if you see a relative that, again, things don't seem right, some of the things that Judge Vlack had mentioned about bills stacking up, or they can't afford some of these things and you know they should be able to, maybe it's time to reach out and have that tough conversation with them of, hey, what's going on? It may not be best to go to the caregiver first, because if they are the perpetrator, that could cause an issue. But also recognize that many times those caregivers are on the up and up. You know, we talk about these are some of the, but they are not all. There's a lot of good people out there. There's a lot of resources that are put into placements and, you know, keeping people in the system, getting them, you know, their powers of attorneys. So some are vetted, many are vetted. But the conversations really need to be had, and really that's what it is communication. So I thank you for your time. I thank you for the interest in this, and for those watching as this moves on through and is played. Yeah, just pass that along to your family members. It's okay to be a victim, and it's okay to talk about it. You have to tell people, or we can't stop the victimization. So now, if there's any questions for me, I don't know if I've ran over my time. I may have talked too long.
Just right on schedule.
All right.
Questions for the sheriff? Brad?
How do they get their cell phone number? This is what, you know, because that no call list and all of that, how are, you know, they're obviously good at it. How are they getting these cell phone numbers? Not many people have landlines anymore.
You're right. Not many people do have landlines. So Mr. Breckman asked, how do they get cell phone numbers? Probably a couple of different ways. Part of that is they get into some computers. People are clicking on links that they're able to get people's call lists. But then there's also places where, you know, you have the do not call. But when you sign up for so many things, either online or at the store, they get your number. And some of those lists that you sign up for, some of those companies sell those lists. And once that phone number is out on the web or the dark web, that some of these thieves pay for in bulk, just like credit card numbers, they pay for in bulk. It really opens the door. How do you protect yourself? Try not to give that out as much as possible. If it's required information, in some cases, when you're filling things out, ask why it's required. If it's imperative, specifically social security numbers, some of those things. There's a lot of places that shouldn't be asking for those things anymore. I don't know many that are, but there are a few that still do.
I think
was looking online, and I'm not online a lot, so I'm not familiar with how things work, but I saw you right to phone, and I thought, how does that work? And so I called the number. First of all, I had, let's see, that was after it wanted a certain payment, a small payment to get information. And so I called the number and got the person's name. It let her have my phone number, and now I'm getting a lot of calls. But I asked where their office was, and I could tell she was talking to someone else. So she gave me, finally, at my insistence, she gave me an address, which ended up to be a motel in San Francisco. So it was a real address, but, and since then I've gotten a lot of phone calls, which I immediately, pretty much immediately blocked. But I'm just wondering what I should have done.
Again, give out as little information as possible until you can really verify that that's a legitimate company. And you're right, the rent to own. We get people that they'll drive by and they'll see a house for sale, and they'll list that house for sale, and they aren't the person that owns the house. It's crazy the sophistication of some of these groups. But then are they so sophisticated? Because you did a little research and you found that it's a motel. And I think if people really do their research and give out as little information as possible, you'll be in much better shape. And never send money. Never send that money.
Sheriff, just by you being here today, I think you answered my next question, but that is, either yourself personally or people in your office, are you available to go to groups to give this talk again to people personally, be they fraternal groups or senior centers in the county, to further give them information about what you see and what they can do?
Yeah, either myself or one of the investigators, and we've had several that have worked some of these in-depth cases that really have some good advice and some direction on how to handle some of these things and some precautionary tools to utilize. So yeah, we are available.
And just to follow on that, although you went over it, would your recommendation be that the emergency call center is who to call if they see a problem? Do they call the non-emergency number at the sheriff's office? Should they call the district attorney? Who is the first point of contact you'd recommend if you see a problem?
Yeah, I think that first point of contact is going to be the emergency communication centers. What happens there then is they create what we call a call card. So then there's a record of not only the phone call coming in, but the time it was called in, who it was given to, and the follow-up required. Or they may be able to give you direction of, more than likely you'll get an officer, and then we'll say, you know what, we can check with the district attorney's office. Because if there is something that is suspicious or maybe criminal in nature, if your first call is to the district attorney, he'll refer it down to us to start that investigation. Or if it's something that potentially ADRC needs to be involved with, or somewhere up in the Health and Human Services area, we can direct calls that way. But the first is to the Emergency Communication Center. And sometimes the PDs aren't manned 24/7, but that communication center is. And some things are very timely, and you'll always get somebody to answer the phone.
Perfect. Sir.
Now, this is under cybercrime, right? When it first started happening, I didn't know what it was. I have an example. I'm not going to put it down. But where do you go when you think you're being scammed online? You go to your local police constable, and they say, no, we don't do that.
So where do you go for cyber crimes? If you're a victim of cyber crime, you should start with your local law enforcement, because the cyber crime could be somebody local. However, many times there is the FBI has a website that you can go to and log that complaint as well. Because as I mentioned, many times they're out of state, out of country, out of continent. And it takes that compilation for the federal government to try to work that overseas.
And I just say this because you go to
I'm sorry?
Because he asked you if you speak to other people, so you speak to the high school level. And
What-
the reason I bring this up is because a lot of people do this. We don't do it. We don't do it. I think that can scam.
Yeah, we surely could have requested, and, there's a couple of school resource officers in each of the large jurisdictions anyway. So I think some of that information is being relayed, but if needed, we could head out there too.
Any other questions for the sheriff? Again, Sheriff, thank you so much
Thank you
for
very
all you
much.
do every day and what your staff does every day. Well, we really appreciate it. We've got an extraordinarily safe county in St. Croix County. We're so lucky, and it's because we've got almost 120 folks in the overall sheriff's department working hard every day, either on the roads or in the emergency communication center, or in the jail, or in investigating. The sheriff has got an enormous amount of responsibilities, and this is just one of them. Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. We're going to do one more program before we take a break, and that's going to focus on the financial side and financial abuses of the elderly. And we've got two wonderful people. If they could make their way up to the podium, that would be great. Michelle Johnson and Jerry Cook. Michelle is in the securities industry, and Jerry is in the banking industry. And I'll let them talk a little bit about themselves as well as give their presentation. But I know in Michelle's case, she's been at this for 20 years. Jerry has as well, close to. And I know Michelle is a CPA and was the CFO of a charitable nonprofit in her career before going into the securities industry. And Jerry, tell us a little bit about yourself as well, and then we'll get into the program.
Well, I work for First National Community Bank, focused in Richmond, but we're also Hudson, Somerset, and Dresser. I've been at the bank for 19 years, and I started on the front line as a teller, and now I am the deposit compliance officer. So I work more on the backside of deposit accounts and making sure that we are complying with all banking regulations. But I also deal with and file most of our reports for fraud and elder abuse.
Thank you. Should we start with Michelle? And Michelle had a packet of information that she's left out front, so be sure to pick that up. And we'll just turn right to Michelle.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bob. So as Bob said, I have a folder out there that has some really valuable information on both financial abuse and fraud. And we've had so many great speakers before us that really dug into that. And so, we very much appreciate that. We're seeing, as the sheriff said, definitely a rise in this type of behavior. And it's really, really disturbing. Our clients that we deal with on a daily basis, these are folks that are focused on as victims of these scams, primarily because they have more of a concentrated income and financial security. Also because, of course, they are, not as likely to identify or report that fraud for many reasons. But also because they have been raised to be polite and, respected, especially if they think that, like the sheriff said, if it was the IRS calling or the sheriff's department calling, they were raised to be trusting in that. And so they are really, very easy targets for this type of abuse and fraud. We are seeing especially senior women are nearly twice as likely to be abused or have fraud perpetrated to them because of the fact that they may not be as involved in the financial or educated in financial matters. So, we're seeing that on that side. But one thing that hasn't been mentioned yet, and I think is really important to remember, is that there's abuse in the industry as well. And so, it's really important that people, when they are investing, that they're investing with a reputable company, that it's not an 800 number, that they have to talk to somebody that maybe, is not in this country, that they had to dial a 4 for this and 7 for that to get, in touch with somebody. That's why it's so important to have a local banker, have a local financial advisor, somebody that, not only they know, but also their kids and grandkids know. So that's really important. And, for folks like us, I'm talking to my clients every single month. And so I'm one of the ones that's more likely to recognize if there's some loss of capacity. I might be, probably speaking to them more often than even some of their family members. So again, it's important for you to not only develop those relationships, but also to have those people that you trust. And I'll very much encourage, if you are the spouse that normally handles those financial decisions in your household, make sure that your spouse is involved. I think that that's one of the reasons why the women are, a target for a lot of this, is because they've never been involved, especially of a certain generation, haven't ever been involved in those financial decisions. And so it's really important that they're attending those meetings with their financial advisors, that they have those relationships with their advisor, with their bankers, because, we're seeing so much of this happen. I'd love to see it stop, for sure.
Michelle, just a quick question. You mentioned the not talked about area of internal abuse by
Yes.
financial institutions.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I had a bit of personal experience with that, where a very well-known national brokerage company had a very sharp, I'll call him salesman,
Okay.
contact somebody that I knew. And they were older, and the person was very friendly on the phone and very thoughtful, and assured them they had this wonderful track record of 20% returns for every year, safe investments, whatever.
Yeah.
And the person put money into their account, and they called them very often, because we talked about earlier with the judge and the sheriff. Got very friendly, very nice people. And so more and more money went into the accounts, and then they started to churn the accounts. Could you just chat with us a little bit about what churning the accounts means and how that whole scam works? And then 3 questions all at once. And then what can a person do about it once they decide, I think I'm being scammed by this major financial entity, one of their salesmen. What can I do at that point?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that our government is really cracking down on. Let's see, about 3 years ago, the Department of Labor really got involved in this particular problem, because we were seeing that. An advisor might say, oh, I've got vacation coming up. I better sell a couple of stocks to make some more commissions, to get, more income. And so you'll see more and more the case where companies are going towards flat fees. So making sure that those advisors are a fiduciary, making sure that they are doing what's in the best interest of the client, and making sure that there's a flat fee. So no matter what is needed for that client, it's done for the client and not because commissions are going to be generated accordingly. The things that I think Warren Buffett said it best: if you don't understand what you're investing in, don't do it. We have seen even very educated clients come to us from other advisors that they're in private equities, they're in annuities that have a 14-year surrender period, that they're in real estate trusts, things that they do not understand. And so I'll really, encourage you to not invest in something that you don't understand. Make sure you do your homework and make sure that the company that you're investing with, our company's been around for 100 years. Maybe I'm putting the bar up high, but, make sure they've been around for a long time. Yes.
Where are you headed?
I'm with Edward Jones. So Edward Jones is headquartered in St. Louis. I have an office in North Hudson. Yeah, great question. But other things that you can do as far as to prevent both the elder abuse and fraud, both with security people and with family or a trusted one. We have a thing called a trusted contact on an account. So a trusted contact is somebody that doesn't have trade authority, but there's somebody that the advisor can contact if they feel like there's some kind of a misuse or abuse or decline with the client. Also, powers of attorney, which I'm sure that they'll talk about later, are very important as well, and something that we focus on immensely. But in general, just make sure that you really have done your homework and investigated what you're getting into.
And what's the national body that regulates you? And if you had a case you could bring to them,
Yeah.
and again, in my experience, they're really very good, and they do not want to see brokerage houses commit fraud.
Oh,
And they
my
come
goodness,
down
no.
hard. But what, who is that? And
Great question. So on the last page of the packet that you'll see in that green folder is two columns of resources. One is if fraud occurs, and that's more along the lines of make sure that you're getting a credit report every year. Make sure that, if you feel like there's, trust issues like Federal Trade Commission issues, there's a contact number here. But I'm regulated by FINRA, and that is a national organization, and that's also on here too. Is FINRA Scams is in the middle here of the additional resources. But it's very important to, like I said, not only investigate, but also our FINRA board has broker check is one thing online that you can look at and see if that advisor has ever been involved in a crime. Yes. Okay, let me think about it a bit. Financial Industry National Association, I believe. Or Financial Investments National Association, sorry. Yeah, good question.
thank you, Michelle. We'll turn to Jerry at this point. And whereas Michelle probably has a range of clients, but maybe being in the securities industry and people with available money to invest, maybe they're slightly more sophisticated than the average person. But Jerry's been on the front lines for almost 2 decades, 19 years, with a community bank. And I can only imagine the many, many things you've seen, Jerry, and what you folks do. Could you just share some of those things with us?
Sure, yeah, and we've seen a lot of things that the sheriff talked about, just to reiterate some of those. The financial exploitation is usually done by someone that the victim knows, that, it's cashing a check issued to an elderly person without their authorization, or it's even forging their signature. We have seen a lot of more of the fraud, and that's usually done by a stranger or a telemarketer, and we've seen all the cases. We've seen the lottery check fraud. We've seen someone had gotten information that they won the Publishers Clearinghouse, and of course, nobody showed up with a big check or balloons in their yard, but they did give all their information out, all of their financial information plus their personal information. We still see the people coming in with a lottery check that they won the lottery in Canada, and they received a check that they need to mail some of the proceeds back. But we have totally seen all of the same instances. Some of the ones that we have seen that we've actually suffered financial loss to either to the bank or to the customer. We had the wire, the grandchild fraud. They were called over the phone that their grandchild was in an accident with a foreign diplomat, and this was supposed to be happen just in Minneapolis, and that the grandparent needed to wire money, and of course not to tell the parent or to let anyone else know. Well, when the customer did come into the bank to wire money, they had been explicitly told that the bank was going to ask them what it was for. And when we do international wires, we do have to have a purpose for that wire. And the customer told the bank that they were updating property in Mexico because that's where the funds were going. And with having lots of snowbirds, that's not quite an unusual transfer to happen in our bank. The customer came back again because the funds had been transferred, and that the They came in because the grandchild had called and said that they needed more funds for medical costs for the person that was in the accident. And again, they came in and told the bank that it was for property updates. But in total, that customer had sustained almost a $200,000 loss because they kept coming in and doing wire transfers. And like I said, transferring money for property updates, isn't too uncommon for us. We've also had customers that have come in that, or the customers have called on the phone and that they wanted to get replacement debit cards, but they wanted them sent to their seasonal address. Well, the addresses that we had didn't match what we had on file. So if anyone is planning to travel, we always want to make sure that the bank's information is updated. And that was something that we caught internally because we had another customer call with the same request. And unfortunately, we figured out that those customers lived within the same area. So we kind of think that that the mail had been stolen out of their mailboxes and knew that they had accounts with us. And these people were trying to get new debit cards on these accounts. Another instance that we just recently had was someone called in to get internet banking. And they had known all the customers' information. And so, we proceeded with the request. And once they got the internet banking, they were able to verify all of the customers' information, all the customers' financial information. And so then when they would call again, they knew exactly what their Social Security deposits were, checks that they had written, and then they wanted to, keep increasing the transfers and wanted to do a home equity transfer to get more money into the checking account so they could use the funds then. Well, fortunately, we had someone on the phone with them that was familiar with the customer, and they recognized the voice, wasn't them, and all the transactions were stopped. And when our real customer did come in to change their accounts, they did recall that they had been contacted for winning a sweepstakes and had given out all of their information. So us as the bank, what we try to do to protect the consumer, the customers, is mostly on our front line. They're the ones that make all the observations and maybe are the only ones that have the knowledge that something's going on. So they may ask more questions, just in an attempt to learn why they're doing these transactions or, the reason for the large transactions, or even warn the customers of the danger of carrying large amounts of cash or withdrawing, making cashier's checks and wiring money. But, it's definitely more questions are being asked to the customer. And if there is someone that is with the customer, accompanying them, we may ask the customer or maybe try and get that other person away from the customer to make sure that they're legitimately helping them and not, coercing them into anything that they shouldn't be doing. We also do check authorizations and documents of their power of attorney or their guardianship to make sure that a person has authority to act as an agent for the customer. And
Jerry, could I jump in there with
Sure.
a question? And it was for both you and Michelle on documents, like you just mentioned. Could you just go just a little bit further into what you require, and do the attorneys that come to you with their standard power of attorney meet your standards, or do you have separate standards, and do you work with them to reach agreement as to what it should be? But just tell us a little bit about some of the documents you have to work with attorneys and trustees, guardians, so that you're assured that what's happening is proper.
Great question. So yes, so the powers of attorney especially, we are able to do it both ways. So either somebody comes in with their power of attorneys and we submit it to our home office and they verify all the information, or we can get all of that information from the client. But it's very in depth. So if somebody is putting a power of attorney on their account, we require everything from driver's license number, where they work, where their address is. I mean, we have a lot of information that we require to do that. And, as we said before, I mean, that is an area that we have a lot of abuse with. And so we are not even able to identify that a client has an account at our institution if that isn't the client or somebody that we already have a power of attorney listed. So they have to come in with that information to us.
And I think the bank isn't as strict. We get presented with power of attorney papers from lots of individuals if they're, already in the nursing home or anything like that, incapacitated. But we do make sure that the power of attorneys are valid, that they're signed, that they're updated. We also require that if you have guardianship papers, that the guardianship is of the person and of the estate. Otherwise, they aren't able to act on the account. But we require just the durable power of attorney.
I interrupted your presentation.
That's okay. But we do, like I said, we do look them over, making sure that the power of attorney is able to act for the customer. And what the customer can do for themselves is the bank can't monitor every transaction or every account that we have. So you should have a joint owner on the account with you or a power of attorney to help look out after the accounts, someone that you know and that you do trust. We do find that power of attorney does change once in a while. It doesn't change often, but it does need to be somebody that you trust. And don't use products or services that you aren't familiar with or you're not comfortable with. If you're not comfortable with doing internet banking, then don't do it. Let somebody else take care of that for you. If you're not comfortable with debit cards, don't have one, or even carrying a lot of cash, on your person, in your car, at your house isn't always safe. If, something were to happen to your house, it's not necessarily a good idea. And of course, again, don't give information over the phone. If a company is calling you, they have your information and you shouldn't verify it. And if you do give out your information, please let the bank know. Let the bank know, let your caregivers know, let law enforcement know. You need to be more proactive if you've given information out than letting the people do something before you have a chance to.
This is almost too simple a question, but if a caregiver or somebody that was otherwise responsible for somebody just had a question that dealt with the bank or the securities firm, should they feel free to contact you? And if they do, who's the type of person, like if Michelle was handling the account, presumably they might contact Michelle directly. If it was the bank, is this the sort of thing that a person who's thinking something might be a little bit shady, can they come to you and share their thoughts with you and receive counseling?
Sure, yeah. If there's, as long as we're not violating any privacy laws, if they're on the account with the person, if they're not on the account with the person, we may direct that. We may try and give them as much information as we can without, violating anything, kind of leading them into the answers. But they may need to seek getting out power of attorney, or they may need to, get the guardianship papers.
Yeah, for us, if exactly what you said, if they were on the account, then we have a lot more flexibility if they have a power of attorney. If they don't have a power of attorney and we can't confirm the account, then I can give them general information on this is what I would do. I can also, as far as the escalation goes in our organization, is, our field supervision gets involved. We contact if they have a trusted contact, on the account, law enforcement, adult protection services, and then of course, state regulators as well. So, I do a lot of educating, and so, I love questions and I love people that have, questions. We obviously want to see this stopped as soon as possible.
I had a very sad story that actually a neighbor told me about a brother, an older brother of theirs that in another state who was suffering from the early stages of dementia, or maybe even beginning advanced stages. And there was a court process that was underway, and it took a couple of months to go through. It wasn't really slow, but it wasn't really quick. And they had the power of attorney over their brother. But they'd just gotten it, and they were just in the process of starting to do some of the safeguards you folks have mentioned, and their brother was victimized by a $5,000 scam. And so the question, do you think if a person came to you and had power of attorney over a person who was failing, let's say, can they set limits on their account as to how large a transaction should be, or when they should be notified of events, because they want to leave the person with independence for small things, but they don't want the big scam to hit? Is that something that you would work with them on?
It's a little harder to do at the bank because we don't, like in-person transactions we could limit, but wire transactions need authorization as well. But, day-to-day check cashing or check writing is a little bit more difficult. We would definitely suggest to have online banking to monitor anything like that. And we have limits when if a large check were to come through that wasn't authorized, we have a certain amount of time that we have to return it. But we can always return things for forgery and stuff like that. But it's harder for the bank to monitor day-to-day transactions.
So for us, we have a limit of a $10,000 limit. And so at the $10,000 limit, we have to get what's called a letter of authorization, or an LOA. And so that's on any account, no matter what age. So that does help. And again, also because we have those personal relationships, we have those, I ask the questions, so I kind of make light of it, but every single time somebody makes a large withdrawal, I'm saying, so I hope you're doing something fun with that money, or, we're going to Mexico or whatever. I make light of it, but we do need to know. We do need to know if there's a reason behind this, if they are having some financial fraud perpetrated with us. And so, it's very common.
And I'll simply say, although it's frustrating sometimes for me, and it's not that I have large transactions I engage in regularly, but I've been with one broker for many, many years. They know me by sight. We visit every few months. They know my voice. I'll call and I'll want to, let's say I'll have a $12,000 transaction. Oh, we got to have it in writing. Got to have it in writing. And you got to have your wife's signature because it's, and I said, come on, guys, we've been doing this my 20th transaction. Yep, got to have it in writing. So we're very thankful for that kind of safeguard. At least I am.
Mm-hmm. One thing I want to mention about power of attorney and joint account holders as well. If you have a separate holder with you on your account than your power of attorney doesn't take precedence. It's going to be the joint account holder. So if you have separate people that you want in charge of different things, they kind of have to act together. So like I said, the joint account holder is equally owning the funds, and the power of attorney is only available to do transactions in the account if something were to happen to that other joint account holder. Yeah, so it's, yeah. So that's always, you always want to have, the checks and balances, but it doesn't always work out. So you have to make sure that if you have the right people checking each other.
And on that same thing, as far as joint accounts, that's something that you have to be a little bit more careful about as far as financials, investments, because there may be some tax consequences to that. So what I mean by that is if you have a joint owner, let's say you have your daughter on as the joint owner, she may have been able to have a step up in basis and not pay any taxes at the death of that initial owner. But if she's a joint owner, then it goes back to the original cost. So, not to get too complicated and nerd out in taxes, but just it is different on your investments versus your bank account for joint owners.
We're closing in on our time frame, but any last comments you folks would like to make about last advice to seniors to keep their financial future safe?
I just want to end with, if we do suspect anything, we always, kind of talk about it at work. And then if we suspect that there's anything that we can do, we would report it to the Adult Protection Services.
And for us, I think the biggest thing is education. Educate yourself on your investments, educate yourself on the people that you're dealing with, and work local. Local is very important.
And just to emphasize, working local, very important. I know First National Community Bank in New Richmond and Jerry, I wish I'd had a banker like that when I was younger. And Michelle Johnson with Edward Jones. And I know they've got enormous numbers of safeguards that they build in every day, very reputable firms and very thoughtful and very, very, very good people, as we've seen here. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today, folks. Thank you. At this point, we'll take a 10-minute break. We'll reconvene at 10 o'clock, and we're going to hear from the Adult Protective Services and Reverend Ramstead, and then we'll hear from our district attorney and conclude the program. So we'll see you in 10 minutes. Folks, we'll get right into the program. We are so fortunate now to have two of our county folks and a representative from the faith community. We've got Bonnie Edlund and Sean Post-Priller, who are with St. Croix County Adult Protective Services and are on really the front lines of this every single day and bring the resources of the county, which are reasonably extensive, to bear on issues that they see across the spectrum of physical, mental, financial abuse and what they do. And the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Ramstead from United Methodist Church of Hudson, or Hudson United Methodist Church, Don Jeffers Ramstead, I meant to say, I'm sorry, I was thinking of another person who I know whose name is Cheryl. I apologize, Sean. Yes. And what remarkable backgrounds they all have. Many years of service with the county, and Reverend Ramstead with a specialty in this for many, many years. And I know she specifically asked me to come in, and she became interested in this when doing an internship in Livermore, California, dealing with the Veterans Administration and elder abuse among veterans and abuse of veterans. And that caught her interest, and she's been specialized in this ever since, and her church has done a lot of work in this area. So with that, I'm going to turn to our two county folks, and I'll let you folks argue who begins.
Okay, and I am Bonnie Edlund of St. Croix County Adult Protective Services, and
I'm Sean Post-Priller.
And we're going to kind of go back and forth. So I'll keep this slide up just for a couple of minutes, just to remind everyone that we are part of St. Croix County Health and Human Services, and we are under the Behavioral Health Department. I know when I initially started in adult protection back in 2013, we were under the ADRC, the Aging and Disability Resource Center. However, we transitioned and now are under the Behavioral Health Department. So, if that's all you remember and you need to make an adult protection report, contact the Behavioral Health Department. So, luckily, thanks to Judge Vlack, we don't have to do a lot of description on some of our PowerPoints, because Judge Vlack's information was very thorough. But adult protection, we are ruled under mainly three Wisconsin statutes. And, and today, of course, the elder abuse reporting system is the statutes that we follow. And then as well as Chapter 54, which is the guardianship piece of our job, which does end up being about, we did a little study a couple of years ago, and about 50% of our job is doing guardianships and protective placements. And then that Chapter 55 is that protective service system of the protective placement.
All right. So regarding adult protective services, we've had wonderful speakers this morning that have different pieces of this puzzle as it fits together. We are just another piece. So this is specifically to us, although I think that it is global, okay? But something that we haven't yet discussed this morning. So oftentimes, adult protective services is the first point of contact if it's not going to be law enforcement. If there is a concern for some kind of abuse or neglect in the community. So when we get these calls, we take all this information and we screen them, and we have up to 24 hours to do some type of a response. Now here's where the big difference becomes. If you need lights, sirens, handcuffs, and someone there now, you don't call us, okay? You call 911, right? They get there in that way. We're slower in this response, okay? We're not emergent, and nor do we work 24/7, supposedly. My boss is in here, but, okay, so when we get these reports and this information, these are the principles that really what we're looking at these with. Now, Judge Vlack has gone through the different types of abuse. Sheriff Knudsen has also gone through some of this. We've heard from the bankers, and these are all different things that we get reports on. But this is the lens that we are looking at this initial information with. And when we go out to meet this person, this family, and start our investigation, these are the things that we are very much at the forefront. So, starting with every action that we take, we are constantly trying our best to balance the duty to protect the safety of the elder with their right to self-determination. Extremely, extremely important. We're Health and Human Services. This is what we do. Right? All of us who have attained the age of 18 are adults and we have rights. Until the court adjudicates otherwise, people maintain these rights. Adults have the rights to accept or refuse services. Adults have the right to make decisions that do not conform with societal norms, as long as those decisions do not harm others. Even if those decisions are not good, not safe, perhaps criminal in nature, there's consequences for making bad decisions. Sometimes they're being uncomfortable. Sometimes they're criminal charges, right? But people have rights to choose. We spend a lot of our time in adult protection advocating for and standing up with people for their rights to choose. Some pretty unpopular choices, actually. Yes.
Self-control.
Self-control.
Like abortion, self-control. Control of self. People are talking about COVID shots now. They don't want, the government's trying to make you get a COVID shot. We don't want it.
What I can tell you is I'm an adult protection worker.
You said that once.
So,
Okay, I reiterate.
yeah, not a doctor, not a nurse, not a public health official,
If
right?
you break it down to control, it
Mhm.
makes more sense.
Mm-hmm.
One simple word, two syllables.
Nor am I a political figure.
Huh?
Nor am I a political figure,
I
right?
know some political people.
Absolutely, and there's even some in this room, right? Absolutely.
I vote for that.
Mhm. But not I mean, ordinances are ordinances, laws are laws, directions are directions, right? That our role is to stand with people,
Give us some of our rights.
to stand,
Sean, when you ask about standing up for people and advocating for
to
them,
stand with people.
stand with people and
Mhm.
advocate for them, who are you primarily advocating to or standing with them to do? Is it with other family members? Is it
That's
with?
actually our next slide.
Next slide, good.
Our next slide.
Absolutely.
They're out of me.
So our service population, of course, today is a symposium on elder abuse. So as Judge Vlack reminded us all, that anyone 60 and over is considered elder in the state of Wisconsin. And so our service population is any of those elder people who are victims of abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation, or possibly they're at risk of being abused, neglected, or financially exploited. However, we do have another service population, and those are adults at risk. Sometimes people use the words vulnerable adults as ages 18 to 59. So again, we serve elders, but also all persons with a disability, or they're considered an adult at risk, ages 18 to 59. And so and again, Judge Vlack's presentation and handouts had great definitions of the different kinds of reports and the different types of abuse that that we are investigating. So again, we are a service we investigate abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. First of all, the abuse. Again, there's in Judge Vlack's information, there's good descriptions of the physical, emotional, sexual, different types of abuse. Those many times are the ones that if we do feel that abuse has occurred, those are the ones that are going directly to law enforcement. That many times there's not a lot of resources that we can provide. We need to make sure that the abuse is the actual abuse is being dealt with, that we maybe have substantiated. So those are going to law enforcement. The other one, the next area is neglect, and neglect by others. And this area, I would say, is very underreported, and I think Chief Knudsen and Judge Vlack also referred to this, is that many times it's due to the victim's fears, the victim's embarrassment, the victim's sometimes intimidation from their families of, well, you have to do this, or we're going to put you in a nursing home. And so those neglect kind of things, I feel that are really, really underreported, and that's due to the victims feeling their fear of having to leave their home or having their support people, even though those caregivers and those support people may be the people that they love. Unfortunately, many times those are also the people that are also neglecting them. Another big area that, and I would say the majority of our reports are in the area of self-neglect. And that is when a person is not, taking care of their medical, physical needs. However, kind of back to what Sean was saying, they do also then have that self-determination and that right to make those choices on their medical care and needs. However, many times the self-neglect reports that then move on to Judge Vlack, for example, are those because there's some cognitive concerns, there's some impairments. Again, kind of an example is dementia. But so due to their incapacitation they are self-neglecting. Many times they don't recognize that they are self-neglecting. One main area under self-neglect is unsafe living conditions, or you may have heard the word, hoarding. And again, many people can choose to live in that. However, if it's due to their incapacitation, due to their cognitive impairment, then adult protection, we try to figure out what we can do. And kind of, I know the financial people really talked strongly of the power of attorney for finance. This is a big area where adult protection, we get out there, and any presentations or things that we do, we really stress the power of attorney for healthcare, why those are important. Because then if you do become incapacitated, then that loved one that you decided many years ago that was going to act in your best interest, they can now become your decision maker, and you can avoid court through a guardianship. So the self-neglect cases are typically the ones that, when adult protection is involved, those are the ones that we are then petitioning for guardianship, possibly protective placement if that person is going to be going into a facility 16 beds or over. The state of Wisconsin requires what's called a protective placement. And so again, those are the ones that we are going in front of the 4 judges to petition.
I think a lot of, with everything that we deal with, it is confidential. And that's by statute. But that's also done out of respect. It's respect for the person we're reaching out to. It's respect for the person that we're serving. I mean, ultimately it's statute, but it's also out of respect. So if we get a number of reports about concern, let's say for a neighbor, she's elderly, her husband passed away a couple years ago, the yard isn't getting mowed anymore, things are progressively getting worse. Maybe the neighbors don't know her all that well, but they used to see her, right? They're concerned. We're getting reports. We can't give back information that we've been out there, that we've talked to her, okay? So we're asking people to take a big leap here. We're telling you that we're getting the reports and we're looking into this, right? We can't tell you what we're doing. But know this, in this example, there might be a lot of reasons. It might have nothing to do with a cognitive decline or dementia. It might have nothing to do with abuse by anyone. As we become older, we go through a lot of life changes, right? At different stages in our life. Becoming widowed is pretty huge, whether you see it coming or not, right? It's a big life change. Retiring is a big life change. Children moving away, having grandchildren, perhaps losing a grandchild. Income changes. Maybe what you had planned isn't quite working out how you had planned. I mean, there's a lot of changes that deal with this population of over 60 that can cause stress. Not all stress is bad, but stress. Depression, grief. Just because someone is alone, maybe they're choosing to be alone, doesn't necessarily mean they're lonely, right? We can make reports because we're worried about people being lonely. This one right here is a social butterfly. Me, not so much, right? She could never tolerate my lifestyle, but hers would drive me insane. Okay? So that whole kind of thing. And I think she's great, right? But I mean, it's the same type of thing. So know that all these signs of abuse that Judge Vlack pointed out are wonderful. And there's certainly things that we want to note. And there are things, if you're worried about someone or concerned, please do make the report, because it's so much better to have said something than in the future look back and say, oh, I should have, right? Or I wish I would have. But if you are making the report and you're not seeing the changes that you wish you were seeing, know that there might be other things going on here and there might be reasons why. That's what I'm asking. Yep. Make sense? You're nodding? Yeah? Okay.
And then the other area, and we won't go into real in-depth just because I think everyone has really covered the financial exploitation. However, that is the reports that are rising the quickest is the financial exploitation. And part of that may be due to, I think it was helpful in 2017, there was a memorandum of understanding with financial institutes to do what the bank representative was talking about, is to be watching out for fraudulent type activity, paying attention to people that are bringing elderly or other people into the banks and stuff. And so so many times our reports of financial exploitation may come right directly from the financial institutions.
But Bonnie, how do you and Sean typically initially become aware of a problem? And what's the next step that you folks engage in?
Dun, 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 dun.
Yep. Who makes reports? Anyone can make reports. And this is just like, a kind of a short list of anyone can make a report. And then the next slide is going to kind of show how to make a adult protection report here in St. Croix County. But yeah, we get this whole list we get reports from, anyone in the community. I think probably our number one question that we get asked when we go to maybe an elderly person's door is, who reported me? How do you know? And we can't tell. We cannot tell. And Sean's going to kind of go into that, but all reporter information is confidential. Sure.
Excuse me, ma'am, but we have the judge here. We have our inalienable rights, freedom of speech, right to bear arms, and now you're saying that we do not have the right to face our accusers.
That is correct in adult protection.
911
Right.
all over
But-
again. 911 all
Right.
over again.
No, but again, what I always explain to those elderly people when I go to their house, and after explaining it, they have a sense of understanding. I said, it's not a good thing, or it's not a bad thing. It's really a good thing.
You're
Because-
kind of like an attorney
because
representing them.
no, because we're bringing out the resources that they need.
Okay.
So kind of, the next slide kind of talks about linkages and stuff. And that's really what,
I'm just picking brains to make
what
me
we
think
do.
about the way you sound to the, if I was a high school student, the general public, that's the way you sound to me. You told me to recycle, you taught me to recycle my pop cans, now you're saying you're not gonna do it. It's like the elders teaching the children to do something and then you just throw it on the street.
yeah, and I'm not going to respond to that, but yeah.
That's fine, I'm
So
not trying
kind
to
of going
corner you.
on,
I'm just
Sean's
trying
going to kind
pick
of
your brain here.
talk
I'm
about
not trying
the
to corner you, I'm just trying to pick your brain.
adult protection reporting here in St. Croix County. So go ahead.
And Sean, before you get into that, and I imagine you talk about other resources that are available within the county, maybe we could hear from Reverend Ramstead, because you folks dovetail so much and have so many ethical standards that you have to meet, both by under the law and otherwise. And certainly in the faith community, Reverend Ramstead sees so many of these issues, and I know different churches have different approaches to it. But Reverend Ramstead, could you just tell us a little bit about how your church approaches issues when you might see an adult abuse issue?
Thank you. I think it's important to state right away that how a pastor will choose to respond depends on the denomination to whom they're responsible to. So I'm a United Methodist, and that means that I have a legal thing I live with, as all pastors do, called the sanctity of the confessional. And that also keeps me from saying a lot of stuff I hear privately. But in the United Methodist Church, because we have a process we call safe sanctuaries, in our covenant, we are required, on being made aware, to do our best discernment to either help the family in question connect with law enforcement or with our vulnerable adult professionals. And then to self-report to our supervisory system so we're not behaving in a vacuum. Most denominations have something similar. All pastors are protected by the sanctity of the confessional. That being said, often the way we resource as someone is either experiencing elder abuse or is a family caregiver for someone is in our office, and we are the person who walks with them. So they're not going to law enforcement alone. I mean, I find comfort in a sheriff's uniform, but not everybody does. There's a lot of authority in that. Judge Vlack and I have a person in common. I really appreciate Judge Vlack. That person in common doesn't want to talk to him. That's what it is. But in terms of elder abuse, in my experience, the biggest thing that shook me was finding out that predators like to come in through the church door. And it isn't just our parishioners, it's also pastors. And people of faith need to be willing to trust that God has called other people to various vocations where they have various standards they have to meet. The difference between a social worker and the sheriff is off camera here to my right. I have to rely on the fact that God calls a number of people to vocations that together work to address this problem. And I have to have a belief that the Spirit will work through all professionals living to their highest ethical standards. So in terms of the dovetailing, Bob, mostly I dovetail by helping them make the first phone call, and if they're afraid of seeing that first professional, being there with them.
Fair enough. And I think Sean and Bonnie were about to talk about some of the other county resources available when you see a problem.
Overhead.
Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
well, because I think our next one is, yeah, just kind of the linkage.
okay. So Sheriff Knudsen, to back up here, had talked about calling the non-emergency dispatch number. When you see a concern, there's always someone there to answer the phone. I had mentioned earlier when we started, if you need lights and sirens and someone there right now to address safety, to call 911. All other reports, this is how you get a hold of adult protection. You call our behavioral health line. Now, this is specifically to St. Croix County. So if there's people in this room or people watching later that live in different places, there's different directives for whichever county you live in. You have to look into your area. So here in St. Croix, it's called behavioral health at that number there. When you make an adult protection report, you're going to be asked for your information. So for your name and your callback number. The reason that we do that is so that when that report gets assigned to one of us workers to investigate or to look into, to reach out about, if we have some further questions or follow-up questions, we like to be able to reach out to you. If you don't want to give that information, you can remain anonymous. We are, again, bound by statute that reporters are anonymous. So within those 24 hours, we as an adult protection team do review those reports, and they go through our screening process, and we have some type of response.
We talked earlier just about the magnitude of the problem and the different types of abuse of elders. Can you comment just statistically a little bit on what do we see as the magnitude of the problem in St. Croix County? And you mentioned that 50% of your issues deal with guardianships, but what's the typical type problem you see, and is this a problem in St. Croix County, and is the trend upwards? And just share a little bit about the magnitude of it with us.
Sure. And unfortunately, I do have some numbers, but they cover the elder as well as the adults at risk. Right. However, a couple of years ago, we had an intern that kind of took all of our data and got some numbers. And we were finding out that about over 2/3 of our reports are on the elder population, so people 60 and above. As far as our adult protection reports, the numbers unfortunately are increasing. Well, unfortunately or fortunately, to me, it's always good, I think, that it's at least reported. So then we can get out there, assess the situation, see what kind of resources that we can get the person that may be in need. But so from like 2020 to 2021, our overall adult protection reports from today, in comparison to last September, we are about 53 more reports than we were last year. And that seems to be it seems like every year that the numbers of adult protection reports in St. Croix County are increasing.
Bonnie, was COVID a factor in that, do you believe?
You know, we We worked as we do in COVID. I know, adult protection, we did go into nursing homes. We had the protective gear if there was an abuse or neglect report. It did seem that it appeared right around March of 2020 for a couple of months, our numbers were kind of down. But I wouldn't say there's been a drastic. And then as far as, I think you had mentioned the types, and for sure self-neglect is by far our highest amount of reports. And then financial exploitation is really sneaking up there. So I think it was good to have, the financial and the securities part of this, because that really is. We, in a financial exploitation case, the good thing is as adult protection workers, we are able to request bank records. So we can get the records, see what's going on, and then that's typically then if we're concerned, then we pull in law enforcement and they do the more extensive investigation. However, many times we get the records and we go out to the elderly person and we review it with them. It's like, okay, do you know that this is happening?
Just a somewhat, maybe a concrete example that may or may not be typical. Let's say I'm an elderly person and I live alone, and you become aware that maybe my hygiene is not proper, or that things seem really messy both on the outside and inside of the home. Would you go out to visit that person and maybe provide an observation of the problem and perhaps then added assistance to something like that? Would that be somewhat typical of what you see?
Yes, that's the self-neglect type, and I'll let kind of Sean, if you want to speak on that more.
I'm getting a call like that. So going out and making contact. Having a conversation, just sitting down and having a conversation with that person, introducing who we are, why we're there. If there's been a concern, I just want to check in, make sure things are okay. Ideally, the person is willing to sit down and just speak with us. Whenever we are a government employee, and whenever the government comes knocking on your door, especially when you're not expecting them, it's anxiety producing. I mean, it causes fear, right?
This is a place where the church can be very helpful in terms of knowing the person when they're needing this sort of intervention, meeting with the person. You see your pastor every week. I love that the financial advisor calls monthly. I know who hasn't shown up this week. And that close intimacy is a way the church can help build the bridge. And if not the pastor, a trained group of church volunteers who are, first of all, background checked, so that we're making sure we're not letting predators into the loop, but having a committee, a team in the church that helps with building those bridges. I have had it where a person with diagnosed dementia, but she presented pretty well in public, her hygiene was slipping. And someone brought it to my attention. I said, well, she's in treatment and we know this. So here's the question. Do you want her coming to church or do you want her to stay home? And so the place of the church in the everydayness at being the front professional who helps folks find the other professionals is really where we fit into the elder abuse situation.
Thank you for that. Maybe everybody could kind of finish up with any takeaways they want to be sure the audience remembers from the services that your institution provides. And why don't we start with Sean for just a couple quick takeaways.
Takeaway I'd like people to know that we believe is that our biggest resource is you. When we talk about extending resources, offering resources, and linking up resources, the community is the biggest resource. Knowing, just observing, just seeing, not being nosy, right? Because you want to be respectful of people. But when you recognize that things are different, that they're not their baseline anymore, reporting that if that's something to be reported. If you have a genuine concern, let somebody know, right? And know that you are all a very important cog in that puzzle. The church is an extremely important. Those are the most difficult calls for us to deal with, is when we are just the stranger at the door and there is nobody else, because it takes us some time to build the rapport to be able to even have the conversation. So you're all very important. That's what I would like you to remember.
And I guess my last comments, I'll just comment on St. Croix County does just have a wide array of services. And so we worked very closely with almost probably every department in St. Croix County. And so we kind of talk that we're kind of the bridge to resources. And because St. Croix County does have so many, great resources, we're connecting people with the ADRC. We're, maybe contacting public health. We're connecting them with economic support, maybe if they're needing some long-term care services. So we truly have good knowledge of the other departments as well, and we really try to link those to the other county services as well that are needed. And we absolutely, one of my always questions is, are you connected to a church? Just because many local churches have so many resources and, working with the elder and the vulnerable. So,
Bonnie, you had mentioned earlier that in previous years, you've been connected with ADRC, and we have the ADRC director with us today. But rather than call him up to talk about things, Bonnie, maybe just in a sentence or two, could you just reflect on some of the services that are provided by the county, for example, in transportation or meals or visits? Just share with us what some of those things are that an elderly person might be able to take advantage of that they don't know they can.
Sure. I think the one that we probably use the most are that information and assistance specialist, and that's for those. They just have a lot of information of different resources that our residents that may assist the resident. So they're usually our first contact. However, in cases, a lot of our cases are self-neglect. We pull in the dementia care specialists very often. We also, like you said, we're reaching out to the transportation for medical appointments. We may find out that's why the person is self-neglecting, is they have no way to get to the doctor. Some of the clinics and hospitals have ended their van service. So, we have a great transportation. Meals on Wheels or home delivered meals are big. If we find a self-neglect case that they really aren't, well nourished, and we just offer that, and they one of their things, well, it's not something I could afford. It's like, well, really, you don't have to pay for them. Again, it can go by your, what you can afford. So we just really try to connect them. Another great resource is the elder benefits specialist and the disability benefits specialist, those that are trying to get on Medicaid, medical assistance, or Medicare. Just that, a great
There's
resource.
nothing simple about those forms. So we have
So
folks that are very, very good at navigating
the first
it.
point of contact in the county should be the information.
That ADRC, right?
ADRC.
And we get, one of the things for who makes reports, we get quite a few reports from the ADRC as well. So people will, I think the ADRC does a great job with their marketing and promoting, and so people are aware, and so they may be contacting them, but then their social workers or workers may think, well, but this I think is more adult protection, and then they'll swing it our way. So again, we work very closely with the ADRC.
And again, they assist both the elderly and the vulnerable.
Right, the 18 to 59.
And we have a question from Pastor Zyman.
What does ADRC stand for?
Sure, Aging and Disability Resource Center, yep. Sorry about those acronyms. Those acronyms are difficult.
I'm going to jump in here. I'm going to just jump in here. Yes, it's the Aging and Disability Resource Center. And for any St. Croix County resident who happens to be watching this, I know from experience that our Aging and Disability Resource Center specialists know how to help us, can also help you speak Minnesotan if you're doing family care across the river. I think the one thing I would put out there is a question you haven't asked. And this is more geared towards the family caregiver, especially when it's an adult offspring who no longer lives in the same town. When you're with your parent, one of the things you can do so that you have access to resources is go to church where they go to church. So many times the kids come home and they skip church. That means that the family caregiver just lost the opportunity to make contact with the one person who can help you with a single phone call know all the local answers that are presented in this video. So skipping church because the kids came home is not in our best interest as elders. I qualify under Judge Vlack's rules. It's also not good practice for adult offspring living somewhere else because we live here and we see parents weekly. And that's a question you didn't ask me, but that's an intervention that I would like to make sure we lift up.
Great. Well, thank you, panel, for an awful lot of information you've shared with us this morning. We appreciate everything you do every day, and you see so many people and do so much good. And you've noted the other entities in the county that are supportive and in the faith community. And thank you again for all you do for that very vulnerable community. Thanks.
Thank you.
We're at our last presenter, but I'm actually going to do two things, if that's acceptable to Karl, our district attorney. I know Judge Vlack has stayed with us all morning, and I know he has some additional comments that he's picked up on as a result of some of the questions that have been asked and whatever. So I'd like to ask if Judge Vlack would like to join our district attorney. I'll call on the district attorney first, and then we can have just a little conversation between Judge Vlack's observations and what Karl Anderson has to say. Now, Karl and I talked about this program about a year and a half ago, and it was postponed because of, as we said earlier, the COVID crisis. But Karl has a number of other things that he's got planned with leaders in the state on this issue and bringing in investigators from Madison and others to work with his assistant district attorneys and the law enforcement community. And I'll turn to Karl to talk about how he reacts to issues and what he's got in the future for the district attorney's office.
First of all, I want to thank Supervisor Bob Feidler. Like he said, we talked about this about a year and a half ago, and he was from the get-go eager and willing to help, and he's the one who reached out to everyone who spoke today, and I really appreciate everything he did, bringing us all together. One of the main things that I think we both wanted to accomplish with this was to get everyone who works with elders in the community into one room so we can all hear from each other about what the different agencies and groups do. So everyone has kind of a more complete picture about elder abuse and knows all the resources, but also this is recorded and it can be sent out to other members of the community to provide information also. So generally, almost by definition, elder abuse cases, as far as criminal prosecutions go, are extremely challenging cases. They're often very difficult to prove, and I know it can be frustrating for victims. So some of the challenges, which are kind of inherently obvious, oftentimes when we learn about financial or physical abuse, it's not right after it occurred. It can be many years later, especially with financial. If it's a power of attorney or a family member who's stealing, it might not come out into the public or into the people's attention until the individual passes away, and then it's going through probate, like the judge discussed earlier. And that age of learning about things can make it difficult to investigate, difficult to prosecute later. Oftentimes, victims might be dependent on the perpetrator. So you can have a caretaker, power of attorney, family member. I know other panelists have discussed that. Diminished capacity of victims. Whenever we get a case, we're thinking, how is this witness going to present to a jury? Is the jury going to believe this person? Oftentimes with elder abuse cases, it's not even an option. They might be deceased or have such diminished capacity that they wouldn't be a witness. So we have to, where normally we rely on the testimony of a victim, we have to gather other evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt a crime has occurred. And when you have either a deceased victim or a victim with diminished capacity, it's easy for the perpetrator to just say, no, they gave me this money for X, Y, and Z. Or if it's a power attorney, no, I really, I took out $20,000, but they needed house repairs. And it's difficult to prove when you have a victim who can't contradict that, that they didn't have the actual authority or they're not using that money for the interest of the elder or the at-risk adult. If it's physical abuse, they might say that this elderly victim is just prone to falling and that's what their injuries are from. Another challenge is criminal cases generally take a while because the defendant has a constitutional right to due process, constitutional right to an attorney. Their attorneys file motions. And you might have a victim who's on hospice or doesn't have much time left, so that's another challenge. The good news is the legislature, especially recently, has been working pretty actively to try to address some of these challenges. Recently, we had Marcy's Law, which gives victims a number of constitutional rights. Those don't trump a defendant's constitutional rights, but it includes that victims have a constitutional right to proceedings without unreasonable delay, which means, if the defendant just seems to be trying to delay the case, we can argue that they're violating the victim's constitutional right. Another one, statute we can utilize is depositions in criminal proceedings, which is pretty rare, but if you have a victim who maybe is deteriorating or has a terminal illness, we can do a deposition that's recorded and that we can play that at trial if they're not available to testify. And this is brand new. I think it was August 6th, so just about a month ago. I would say hot off the presses, but it's not even on the website yet for the legislature. But there's two new statutes passed by the legislature. One is 971-108, which says that the district attorney and the courts have a duty to expedite elder abuse cases. So hopefully they don't get as bogged down in the court system as cases can be, just to the nature of criminal cases and defendants' due process rights. Another one, which is really unique, and as far as I know, has not been used yet anywhere in the state. A big problem, I know Sheriff Knudsen talked about it, is it's very difficult to get money back to victims or their family. You have to wait for the case to conclude, then seek restitution, and maybe, but probably not get any money even once restitution's ordered. But there's a new statute. Time will tell how that plays out in the courts, but there's now a provision allowing the district attorney to seek seizure of defendant's money while a case is pending. So you don't have to wait for the case to conclude to try to seize money and freeze it at least, so the person doesn't just start selling assets or spending the money to try to recoup the losses for victims. So a lot of this has been touched on already, but I want to highlight a couple things. So abuse of individuals at risk doesn't have an age limit. It's just somebody with physical or mental condition that impairs his or her ability to care for their own needs. And it includes, like Judge Vlack talked about, emotional, physical, sexual abuse, confinement, deprivation of basic needs. And then penalties, they're basically violating any or committing any of those, thanks. I forget that I'm not controlling the slide with my computer. So you can see the bottom 2 bullet points there are those new statutes I was talking about. And there's the definition of adult at risk. There's no age limit. The key is diminished mental capacity. Here's the penalties. Basically, any elder or at-risk adult abuse is a felony. There's only one case where it's a misdemeanor. One unique thing is, it's actually very unique in Wisconsin law, is that if the person, if you cause bodily harm of an at-risk adult, it's a Class H felony. Generally, it's only a felony if the injury requires stitches or if there's a broken bone. So that's one way the legislature has decided to make elder abuse or at-risk adults penalties more serious. So these are other statutes. Obviously, an elder or at-risk adult could be the victim of any single crime. These are ones that relate specifically to those types of individuals. So there's abuse by or neglect of patients or residents, such as a nursing home. Theft has a unique provision that makes it a felony if the victim is an at-risk adult. So normally to get to a felony level theft, it has to be over $2,500. With this subsection of the theft statute, if they're an at-risk adult, it's automatically a felony. We don't have to prove a dollar amount. That doesn't mean we're going to charge a grandkid with a felony because they stole $5 from their grandma, but it's an option for the district attorney's office. Sexual assault has a provision if somebody has a mental illness or a deficiency. So this is the last one I was going to talk about. A really challenging type of financial exploitation to prove can be power of attorney. So, because power of attorney has the legal authority under the power of attorney to control the assets, the money of the individual. So it's hard to prove if that person is abusing their responsibility, prove that they're not using it to the benefit of the individual. But like the sheriff talked about, if we can establish some sort of pattern, you know, the power of attorney takes out $5,000 and then buys a $5,000 car. You know, things like that, we can then charge money laundering for using. You have to prove that the person knew the money was derived from unlawful activity. And then if they just keep it, transfer it, conceal it, spend it, that's money laundering. So it's also a useful statute that, although it's not specific towards elder abuse, it can be a useful statute in prosecuting these types of cases. So that was a relatively very brief overview of some of the specific statutes that, you know, when we get a referral, we have to look at what can we prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And I know I've had victims where I've had to say, you know, it's not that I don't believe you, it's not that I don't think this is serious, but we just can't prove it. And I know it's devastating, but it's the reality that these cases are very tough. The legislature, like I said, is doing what they can, I think, to, I guess, give more options to the district attorney, to prosecutors, to try to have successful cases, but they're challenging. But things like this, I think, help, you know, where everyone knows what everybody does at every stage of the proceedings, so we can hopefully, by the time it gets to my office, by the time it gets to the courts, we have the best chance of, you know, a successful outcome of seeking, you know, restitution and justice for these victims. So.
Karl, I know Judge Vlack has some observations that he's made during the program, and why don't we call on Judge Vlack at this time, and you folks can interact if you'd like, and then I'll call on Karl for his final observations as well. Judge Vlack.
I don't want to age myself, but I became an attorney when Richard Nixon was president. And I want to mention that hearing the presentation by Sheriff Knudsen, as judges, we don't get involved until something is actually filed in the courthouse, other than During the course of investigations, investigators can come to us for search warrants to get information or subpoenas. And there has to be a legal basis to do that. But I am astounded by the number of warrants and requests we get that involve the internet and cell phones. And I'm sure that Mr. Anderson can also vouch that it's almost overwhelming. So you think pre-1995, there might be some requests for phone records, but post-1995, it's just absolutely incredible. I also want to mention, Pastor Ramsad mentioned we had this person in common. I have to emphasize, I do not know who this person is. I didn't know this until today. The reason I say this, ethically, if I know that name, I'm off that case, because judges are ethically cannot be approached by anybody without both sides knowing what's going on. And so I cannot discuss the case with anybody. I don't want to know this person's name because, again, if that's the case, I'm off the case. The other thing I want to mention is that there was a question about how do these people get phone numbers? Okay, I'm a dinosaur. I still have a landline. Okay. I also have a cell phone, and it works. But I will get calls on my landline, and I am convinced that scammers are so expert at this. They just go down, change one digit, make the call. They get hit, great. If not, they just keep on going. I think they do the same thing for cell numbers. In the last year, I've also noticed you might be getting new scammers saying, you know, law enforcement's really come under a lot of pressure and criticism last year. You know, would you like to give a donation to this whatever society? Well, would you mail it to me? Click. That's them hanging up and me hanging up. But also, another scam. We noticed some activity in your Amazon account. Would you please call this number? Well, if you go online and look at your actual account, you're not seeing that. But and the other thing I want to mention is two things. One, there was a question about accusers. Certain reports are confidential by statute. That's legal. That's not a question of any of us to deal with. That's the legislature. However, the law has, and the judges and the courts have said that's legal. However, once they're in the courtroom, there's a certain burden that has to be met. And persons who might be accused of something have the right to an attorney. And the last thing I want to say to everybody listening, if you're getting a call and something sounds too good to be true, I guarantee it's probably not true. So, thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Karl, any concluding statements you'd like to make about observations we've had during the program or that you'd like to reference regarding your office?
No, I just thank you everyone who spoke. Thank you everyone who came. I think it was a really good group of people that Supervisor Feidler put together for this. So thank you again to Bob Feidler.
Well, I just want to thank Karl and the judge and all the other speakers who were here today because we covered a spectrum of things very quickly. We touched on things. Hopefully we'll have a life after this. Thanks so much to Pastor Ziman and Doug and Faith Community Church and for doing the recording of the program today. We'll be sharing that with the local TV station, and they've agreed, I think, to edit the program. And if you've watched that, you'll see it might appear a number of times over the coming weeks, and it will reach, hopefully, an audience that will greatly benefit from your marvelous presentations this morning and information sharing. So with that, unless there's any further comments, we'll conclude today, and thank everybody for coming. Thanks so much.